Thank you. Appreciate you. All right, well, fantastic. So really, truly, it's a huge honor to be here, so thank you guys. I'm going to try and not ramble too much, share a little bit about my story. So to give some context, if technology will work for us, let's make sure this is on and I can switch slides. We were doing so good. Well, we're just going to have to use it like this. So I actually have one person hiding over in the corner that I'm going to introduce real quick. So Johnny Antoni, he's actually the art director for our company and the most creative, brilliant mind I've ever met. He's over there videoing because he's a creative mind and he's going to try and capture some of this. And then my older brother, Ken Robertson, who runs ops for the company. So the three of us actually started Picmonic about 6.5 years ago. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about our story and how it ties to memory, and hopefully is applicable to you guys today, show you a little bit about our company and our platform, demo it for you, and potentially answer some questions and maybe do an activity. We'll see how we are on time. So to go ahead and jump right in, I started medical school at the University of Arizona back in 2009. And this was something for me at that point in time that was a big deal. I'd known my entire life that I wanted to become a physician, wanted to go to med school, and so I started school. And that was a very, very happy moment. And very quickly, that turned not so happy. Because as soon as you start, you realize, you're learning a massive amount of information that you need to retain long term. And for me, there's this big exam, 2 years in. It's called the United States Medical Licensing Exam. It's your boards. It certifies you to become a doctor. It covers everything you learn within the first couple years. And how you do on that test determines essentially your future. So it's a big deal. And studying for that test is essentially memorizing thousands upon thousands of bullet point lists in black and white textbooks with words like subependymal giant cell astrocytoma. Right? You're saying that. I was saying the same thing. It's like, what in the world is that? So really, really antiquated methods of learning and retaining information, right? Which is problematic, especially if you're hoping to remember this information long term. So I'm sitting there looking like this, right? Sitting in the library, exhausted, just drained, feeling incredibly defeated, but yet understanding the importance of what I'm learning, realizing I was trying to train to become an emergency room physician. This is actually life or death on the line if I can't remember information. Not to be dramatic, but that's the reality of it, right? So I'm sitting there really, really stressing, thinking, holy. Yet, failure wasn't an option. This was not a place and time in my life where not learning and not remembering information was acceptable, right? This wasn't just about passing an exam and cramming to get it done. I understood the importance and the criticality of the information that I was learning. So what did that kind of prompt? Well, we're going to jump right in there in a second, but before we do, I want to warm your minds up a little bit and place you in the shoes that I was in back then. So we're going to do a quick memory exercise, and I want you guys to take 10-15 seconds and look at this list of information on the screen. And you're going to try and remember it. Niemann-Pick disease, autosomal recessive disorder, deficiency of the enzyme sphingomyelinase, cherry red spot on the macula, and foam cells. All right, now what I want you to do is take 15 seconds and just try and remember this picture. So, by show of hands, real quick, who thinks that they could list off the bullet point list information? All four? Yes, all four. And nobody? All right, who thinks that they could list out what was in the picture? Image? Anybody? All right, so at least a few show of hands. Excellent. So what are we really trying to get to here? What are we trying to elicit? Well, the brain is a very powerful thing. It's incredible what we can do if we leverage it in the ways that it was designed to function. So we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about this. So memory, what is the memory? What is memory? Memory is the faculty of the mind by which information is encoded, stored, and retrieved. And we think about it in these different kind of stages. Now, I'll state up front, I am not a doctor. I am not an expert in neuroscience. I am not expert in anything, okay? So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is more broad scope, what's known in potentially the industry or science today, but we could argue all day on specifics. So we're not going to go too deep, but I want to cover this more for the application perspective. But so where does memory start? Well, memory starts with encoding, right? So encoding, taking in senses. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, and what you touch or feel, okay? So these sensory inputs drive, essentially, the formation of memories. And when we're talking about learning, we really are thinking, more often than not, what we see and what we hear, unless it's a very practical skill or application. That changes things a little bit. But for the majority of academia, what you see and what you hear. So I'm going to talk about 3 specific memory phenomena real quick that are applicable to learning and memory in science. So anyone familiar with the dual coding theory? Anyone ever heard about this before? Okay, so dual coding theory basically says, we have a scientist in the audience, dual coding theory basically states that we interpret information through distinct but dissimilar channels in the brain, what we see and what we hear. Okay, so 2 channels are more powerful than 1. This sounds pretty basic, right? If I see it and I hear it at the same time, that can be more powerful than seeing it alone or hearing it alone. Now, there are confounding effects if you see, hear, taste, touch all at the same time. It's a little bit stimulus overload. But at least hearing and seeing are very powerful. Dual coding theory. We're going to keep it that simple. Picture superiority effect basically says that we remember pictures better than we do words. Okay? We remember pictures better than we do words. Does this sound weird? No, right? I remember your face, but I'm not going to remember your name. A picture says 1,000 words. These are things we're all familiar with, but yet we might not apply in learning. Von Restorff effect basically states that we remember things that are weird, things that stand out, things that are different. Okay? So if you were looking at 4 little viruses, coronavirus, influenza virus, rhinovirus, and RSV, and you see the little rhino with the virus legs, I mean, who's not going to remember that? And then, so we might say, all right, so we've got dual coding theory, von Restorff effect, picture superiority effect. These are great phenomena in theory, but how do I actually apply that? What does that look like applied to learning? So let's talk about mnemonics. A mnemonic is just a tool or device to help you remember something better. That's, in its simple, what it is. Here's a couple different examples of mnemonic techniques. One of them being chunking. Chunking, the most common form of chunking that you're probably familiar with, is a phone number. Take a 10-digit number, 3 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits, right? We break it up into logical sequences, or at least groups, chunking, to remember better. Acronyms. An example of an acronym would be Roy G. Biv, trying to remember the colors of the rainbow. You take the first letter of every different word and string it together, Roy G. Biv. The method of loci is much less common, or something that you're probably not as familiar with. Has anyone in here actually read the book Moonwalking with Einstein? Anybody? We've got one. So if you guys haven't, or if you don't prefer to read, just check out the TED Talk, Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Fowler. Great book about memory, or Daniel Keelov, The Art of Memory. These are very quick TED Talks, but very informative. You're talking about some of the most brilliant minds and what they can remember and how they go about this. They'll talk about the method of loci, which is building these memory palaces based on spatial orientation and association. We're not going to go deep in it today, nor on the PEG system. It's using lists and orders of numbers to associate sounds. Again, probably not something we'll discuss. The phonetic mnemonic system is something I want to tell you guys about, though, because it can be really, really powerful, and it's actually what we've used at Picmonic. So now, going back, does anyone remember the bullet point list? One item. What was it? Cherry red macula. And how about the picture? What was in the picture? So what are we talking about here? Well, phonetic mnemonics. Let's go ahead and look at this crazy disease. This is real, by the way. So Niemann-Pick disease, you have a man with a pick in his knee. Niemann-Pick, man with a pick in his knee. And Niemann-Pick disease, well, what do you get? You'll see these cherry red spots on the macula. So just remember the cherry red eyes. Or it's an autosomal recessive disease. So he's holding up this Reese's recessive chocolate. And you see foam cells on histology exam. And he's got this foam coming out of his mouth. Right? A little grotesque. Remember von Restorff effect? The things that are different we remember better. And then lastly, sphingomyelinase. What is sphingomyelinase? Well, it's a sphinx on my leg. Phonetic representation of a silly word that ultimately, when I say sphingomyelinase, you don't think of a picturable equivalent. If I say dog, you think of a dog. If I say sphingomyelinase, you're like, what? What's that? Right? So sphingomyelinase, using phonetic mnemonic representations of characters in order to remember the sphinx on my leg. All right, so now Niemann-Pick disease, he's got cherry red eyes, he's holding that Reese's chocolate, he's got foam coming out of his mouth, and he's got a sphinx up in his leg. Well, that's weird. In a couple days, you guys are going to be like taking a shower, and you're going to be thinking about this image, and you're like, all right, that's weird. But you're going to remember it. It's very powerful. So we're talking about the application of these things. So to recap, we're talking picture superiority effect, dual coding theory, von Restorff effect, and the use of mnemonics combined, and how powerful that can be in learning. And we're going to show you more of this in a few minutes. Just a quote that I like, because a lot of times in academia, and especially where we're at, training the next generation of healthcare professionals, a lot of people will say, well, mnemonics are silly. That's just that's cheating, or that shouldn't be used in academia. So critics rarely make explicit that the alternatives to mnemonics in memorizing are either dumb blind repetition or simply outright failure, and no one seems to want to champion these alternatives. I can appreciate that. So the next thing I'm going to jump into real quick, and I apologize since this clicker is not working, is so a lot of what we just talked about was dealing with sensory input, right? So as a learner, bringing in multiple senses in the learning phase. But so that's kind of really encoding and storage and how it affects those. But retrieval is also a critical part of the learning process. So let's talk about it and what you can do differently. So practicing active retrieval is very, very important. And what this really comes down to is frequent low-stakes testing. We as humans have a tendency to, more often than not, we read something and then we want to reread it over and over and over. It makes us feel familiar with the information, but gives us an illusion of mastery. Typically, this is what students do. We read a chapter, then we'll come back and we'll highlight the chapter, and then we'll highlight it a different color, and we'll reread it again, but by the time we're done, we could recite the chapter, but doesn't mean we actually have any contextual understanding to what the hell's in there, which is pointless. And it's an illusion of mastery, because you're typically going to forget this very quickly. So what can we do that's more powerful in the learning setting? Well, retrieval practice is much, much better than review by rereading. So what are we talking about? Frequent low-stakes testing. Simply putting away the information and asking them questions. Ultimately, interrupting forgetting, it goes through a process of reconsolidation and drastically improves the ability for somebody to remember something. As well as, testing allows us to identify areas of weakness. And this is obvious, but at the same time, our natural tendency is to focus on what we know, not what we don't know. We focus on what we know, not what we don't know. So by testing and actually using systems that will identify areas of weakness, you can then direct their attention to those things, right? So one of the most poignant ways that we go about this is through spaced repetition algorithms. Who here is familiar with spaced repetition? Anybody? Okay, so lots of you. This is fantastic. I'm not sure who uses this within your curricula today, but I'm going to explain the basic concept. Spaced repetition is the general just talking about what we learn when we learn something. As soon as we learn something, we start forgetting it immediately, okay? So day one, I've learned something, I haven't memorized 100%, we start forgetting it immediately. Now this information has essentially an exponential decay curve, which is very difficult for us to understand naturally what to do with this. But using algorithms, we can essentially predict when and at how fast you're forgetting information. And the point in time at which you should interrupt forgetting is the point at which you're about to forget something is the point in which you should interrupt the forgetting process, right? But this is not something that we know, especially if you're talking loads of information compounded over years of study, right? It's like, well, I didn't know that I was going to forget this on day 16 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? It's just not normal for us. However, using algorithms, we can plug in a lot of different data points to determine this stuff, prioritize information, and ultimately space out the intervals in time to increase retention. So forgetting curve, that was just quick quick animation, but spaced repetition uses increasing intervals of time between review of previously learned information to maximize retention, right? So it sounds like you guys are pretty familiar with this, but this is something that, they're using in a lot of flashcard applications today, different question banks, but the common, or I guess in a lot of places, the idea that you can go to a workshop, learn something once, and that you're going to remember it forever is bogus, right? We can't teach people something once and not have any review of that information, especially an assessment-based review, and expect them to remember it. So how can we do things differently in learning in order to improve this? So going back to kind of where all this began, I was in medical school, super frustrated, couldn't remember half the things I was learning, figured I was going to be a failure, probably not make it through medical school, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a little drastic, but really believed that there had to be a better way to go about all this. So, sitting in the classroom, studying the antiquated books and just lists of papers. But we live in a world filled with technology, right? I mean, this is modern day. I walk outside of the classroom and I'm surrounded by Pinterest and Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube and Facebook. And I get in the classroom and you're telling me to memorize books. It's not going to work, right? So what we've done is take technology and infuse it with a massive amount of creativity and imagination, and essentially have up-leveled the learning experience. Now I want to walk you guys through a little bit about that. So Picmonic is a company that we started about 6.5 years ago. Picmonic stands for Picture Mnemonics. We've been really focused on the healthcare arena. We've helped over 300,000 students in 150 countries, and our goal is essentially to empower students to increase concept mastery and make learning the impossible possible. I really felt like the majority of what I was learning in med school I wasn't going to be able to remember. And it wasn't until we started using these crazy picture mnemonics, like that Niemann pick disease. That was the first pick mnemonic we ever created, in which it was like, well, I'm never going to forget that. So we've created a visual learning platform. It's intelligent, adaptive, research proven. And when I say research proven, this is important because I came from a background in science where we don't get to make decisions based on what we think. We make them based on evidence, right? So we actually ran an international research board approved study that empirically validated 330% increase in memory retention. 330%, which is literally the difference of failing and passing. This was 1 month out. The power and impact of this actually compounds long term. So very, very impressive study, and this was with our first version of the software over 4 years ago. But again, just trying to show you guys what this can do in science when used appropriately. And we started this with healthcare, but it's visual learning. It can be applied to anything, whether it's K-12 or college or corporate training, whether it's concepts or diagrams, charts, equations, definitions, checklists, decision trees. It's just making learning fun and effective, right? It's making things weird. It's making it multisensory. So one of the things, though, in order to do all this, was the original concepts that we created. They took us an immense amount of time and energy to create. I mean, you're talking about not only the creativity aspect, but the artistic ability. And after we created our first product, we had people from essentially everybody that we would meet with and talk to said, hey, you know what this would be great for? And you fill in the blank. We don't have we're a small startup company. We're actually based out of Galvanize upstairs. So make sure you say hi after the show. But we didn't have the ability to go and start creating content for every different area, nor is it my goal. My goal was, well, we've created a methodology that's really powerful and can be used in any area of study, but how do I truly empower the world? Well, we built this Picmonic generator, which is simply a very intuitive authoring platform that enables, whether it's the end user or companies or publishers, to be able to take and plug their content in and transform it to these visual mnemonics and then disperse it to their learning audience. And how do we do this? Well, really, we had to remove some of the barriers, which is all about the creativity and the artistic ability. I can't draw a stick figure for the life of me, and coming up with these crazy mnemonics was very difficult. So first thing we did was built out this massive character database. I want to be able to drag and drop pictures onto a palette. I can't use Photoshop. So how do I do this very simply? I want my 5-year-old's niece to be able to do this effectively. And so massive database of characters, and then a character creator where you type in words and it's actually suggesting different characters that would be applicable. And again, a simple authoring palette that kind of ties it all together, lets you record audio, etc. And so I want to be able to show this to you real quick if I can. So we're going to try and jump out. How are we doing on time, Brent?
Good.
Okay.
You're
15 minutes. All right, who wants to see this in action real quick? And I have no idea if the audio is going to play and be loud, but if not, then I'm just going to walk through it.
This picmonic describes Niemann-Pick disease, portrayed by a pick in the man's knee. This is an autosomal recessive disorder, described by the recessive chocolate, which is caused by a deficiency of the enzyme sphingomyelinase, shown by the broken sphinx on my leg. Niemann-Pick disease is more common in the Ashkenazi Jewish population, represented by the yarmulke. Signs and symptoms of this disease include a cherry red macula, which can be visualized on fundoscopic exam, depicted here by the cherry eyes. Hepatosplenomegaly can also be appreciated on physical exam, shown by the liver and spleen balloons, due to the accumulation of sphingomyelin and other lipids in these organs. Patients also display neurodegeneration,
So there's a few more things in there than I showed you originally, right? But so this is the picmonic player. It's an interactive multimodal player. It is not like watching a video, even though it seems like watching a video, but you actually get to interact with this. There's a couple important points to that. One is it means that the content is dynamic, it's easily created, and it's easily maintained. Videos are not. So with this, we get to plug and play information. These are assets or elements that can interact but be interchanged very efficiently. So as you click through this, you can see, you can also add, well, what is cherry red macula? It's actually important that a medical student or whatever is going to need to see that exact image of the pathology or the disease or the radiology. Well, you can take and apply whatever your relevant examples are, whether it's images, articles, or videos integrated into the system. But just to show, because again, this is reinforcing the fundamentals of learning. Picmonic is more supplementary in a sense than core, but as soon as you start wrapping in some of these additional learning modalities, it becomes very, very powerful. So I just wanted to show you kind of the learning piece. I'll go and show the quiz real quick. This should take a couple seconds, then we'll jump into some Q&A. So very simple recall-based questions, formative assessment, but an immense amount of data and stats being tracked here. How much time does it take to answer a question? When are they answered? When's the first time they answer? If they come back to it, their overall accuracy. And again, all this gets wrapped into spaced repetition. Whether you're learning 5 things, 100 things, 100,000 things, we essentially are going to help cue you on a daily basis of what you need to be seeing. Okay? So that ties into this, which is the quiz. But I think it's really, it's a quiz tying back to the image, which is very powerful for the reinforcement, but other than that, nothing probably too novel. And then if we jump into this, what I could do real quick is, actually we could probably make that same picmonic, Niemann-Pick, just to show you. Who here is proficient in Photoshop? Yeah, you guys, we got some talented people. So Photoshop was always too confusing for me. So we really just wanted to try and make something very simple. So if I'm going to go ahead and type this, Niemann-Pick, I've already got this asset, so I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and use it, but to give you guys an example. All right, well, he's kind of creepy. Look at those hollow eyes. Niemann-Pick, where do we want him hanging out? Give him like a park? Sure, why not a park? Because he's too creepy, so we're going to switch it up. And there was cherry red eyes, so we're just going to type in cherry, and I've got some cherry eyes. So very quickly though, you can get the idea of what this takes. And foam cells, I like this foam better. And once I actually go to the audio, I can record Niemann-Pick disease, which is a man with a pick in his knee. Oops, I skipped one. And cherry eyes for the cherry red macula. And foam cells shown by the foam. And so within a matter of, I hope that was under 30 seconds, but for sake of example, I can create this information tying academics to illustration. I can wrap in an audio track and record Niemann-Pick disease, which is a man with a pick in his, and cherry eyes for the cherry red macula, and foam cells shown by the foam. So very quick interactive, very quick interactive media. This all information can be categorized and tagged for the formative assessment. It's built into pathways and an overarching ontology, such as the core structure or hierarchy. This can be easily integrated into LMS. But in short, I'm not trying to sell or push this product. It's not about that. I think that the most important thing is for you guys to potentially, in whatever area or background or industry you're in, think about what you can do to kind of up-level the learning resources, especially given the modern day student, right? I mean, you look at me and I'm a relatively young gentleman, lots of gray hairs popping out, but it's, you know, even being in school and dealing with the majority of the old resources that we had, it's just not efficient, it's not effective, it's not there. So how can you guys think about what you're doing differently? And so to end, I would just let you guys know, you can use our platform for free. Simple, fast, and easy to create. You can integrate these learning resources into your existing LMS. Ultimately, what's the goal here? Improve onboarding and training, right? You want employee retention, you want increased performance, you want better results for your company. And I think that drives overarching satisfaction. And then as far as our organization and how we can potentially help you, whether it's for the instructional design, whether it's for the art and creative assistance, you know, the LMS integrations depending on what platform you're using, and data and stats. We also do pilots with the right companies. Most importantly, I really hope that you guys got something out of this today, and I want to take a minute and hopefully answer some questions about anything from the science to Picmonic to whatever it may be, if we have time. So thank you.
Absolutely. I know we have one question actually online. I forgot to tell you we're crowdcasting this all at the same time. So,
excellent.
So Kara's got a question somebody asked online when they were listening to you. So what did they say?
Okay, this is from Joe Cook. What tips can you give everyday trainers without much time or money to start the journey towards improving the forgetting curve?
What tips and tricks can we give the everyday trainer as far as, what was that last piece?
Without much time or money to start the journey towards improving the forgetting curve?
It's a great question. You know, I think without time or money, in this, I don't want to be too generic or general, but ultimately, in order to combat the forgetting curve, what are we saying? We need to review information. We cannot learn it once and then never review it again. So even if you're picking arbitrary times and sequences, I learned something on day one. Let's say I'm going to teach this class. I'm going to teach you guys day one. Well, next week, I'm going to have you guys review a quick set of bullet points for the key, right? And then 33 days later, another review. And that's going to be short and consolidated questions, right? And then another 3 months later, we're going to have to go back and I want you to do a 10-minute quiz, right? So the idea is there's actually sequences, whether it's like the Fibonacci type sequence or there's other sequences that are arbitrarily assigned to take and go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 to 8 to 14 to whatever it may be, right? So there's different sequences that you could use for free to set up and space out training in time without any algorithms, any additional data inputs, but to still combat forgetting curve. So that's the most generic thing I would say, as well as there's just a lot of different tools and resources out there today that integrate spaced repetition, the flashcard platforms, or hopefully the majority of the actual legitimate learning resources backed by science.